you're not tested on. So if you want to study those, go for it, but you don't have to. Okay, so today we're getting now into our skeletal system. That's going to be chapters, I think, 6 through 9. The very first one is all about just the, chapter 6 is the structure of the bone and sort of how it's built and remodeled. This is actually a pretty interesting chapter. Okay. I'm going to go over the basics, just like the functions of your skeletal system. How do we classify our bones? What is the bone tissue made out of? Different structures of bone. How do we grow our bone? Okay, and then how do our different behaviors affect it? So, a couple things. Okay, this would have worked, but hopefully we'll try the clickers tomorrow. Oh, and when I talk to them, the eye clickers don't work with our system. And so I'm sorry about that, but the clickers that we have are only like $25. Is that about right? So it shouldn't break you that much. But, and make sure you bring extra batteries, because they told me when the batteries go low, it doesn't work, even if you have 1 bar. Okay, so something to keep in mind when we're talking about our skeletal system. We're not just talking about bones. We're talking about the whole system. So that means everything that connects to it that helps those bones move around. Okay, so all the cartilage, a lot of connective tissue on the outside of the bones and different pieces of it, and the ligaments, which attach bones to bones. Okay, the primary functions of your skeletal system, obviously support your body. That's an easy one. Another very large responsibility is storage of minerals. Okay, so calcium, phosphate. Okay, you can either have things like magnesium. Okay, so these all can get stored in your bones. You can store your lipids in your bone. Okay, so I don't know how many of you know that, but you actually have fat storage in your bone. If you ever give a bone to your dog and they go right for the marrow, okay, they're going for those lipid stores because obviously that tastes good for them. It's like Mickey D's for them. Okay. Blood cell production. It has usually the yellow marrow is the lipid storage, okay, because our fat cells will have a yellowish tinge, and our red marrow is where we make our blood cells. All the blood cells, the red blood cells and all the white blood cells. Okay. Protection for your different organs. Okay, and leverage, so movement in the body. Okay. We classify the bones, so you're definitely going to need to know this material for lab. I know we're a little bit ahead of, are we ahead of lab? I think we are, but that's all right, you'll be on top of it. Okay, the shape of the bone, how the tissue is organized internally, and then the surface markings. That's going to be the hardest part for you, and you're not going to struggle with that in class, but in lab, you're going to have fun with that. Okay, thanks. Okay, so these are the different shapes of bones. There's 6 of them. Okay, and you need to know this. Okay, your flat bones. It's pretty easy. They're bones that are flat. Okay, these are going to be a lot of the ones found in your skull, your sternum, your ribs, and your scapula, which is in your back. Your long bones. The long bones are found in your arms, your legs. Actually, you know what? I'm going to close this out so we can get it more line. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Right. Also in your hands, your feet, your fingers, and your toes. So these ones look pretty much... Oh, I forgot I actually have my pointer hopefully working. Look at that. Me and technology. Here, even these little bones in your hands and your feet are considered long bones. Sutural bones. These are kind of irregular bones. Okay, they're found in your skull between the flat bones. There's no set number. Okay, so we have roughly 206 bones, but in our body. But if I took did a test on everyone and counted every bone in your body, you're going to find that some people don't have 206. Some people have way more than 206. So that's not an exact number. Okay, so how you develop, is different. Some people have more of these than others. But this is what the sutural bone. These would all be flat bones, and here's the sutural bone. Irregular bones. These ones have weird shapes. Okay, so your vertebrae, which is the example that's showing you, your pelvic bone, okay, they don't really fit into any category. They're irregular. This would be. short bones, these are tiny little bones. They're small and thick. You're going to find them in your ankle and in your wrist. Okay, you can see these right here in your wrist. Sesamoid bones. These ones look like a sesame seed. Okay, these ones also, you can have different types of, or numbers of these bones. You're going to see one definitely in your knee, in your patella. Okay, that's a classic example, but again, you can have these in other locations, so that number can vary. It's kind of interesting. So those are your 6 shapes of bones. Okay. The markings, these are the ones that can be something that you're going to practice a lot in lab. So you have depressions or grooves along the surface. You have projections or elevations. This is where your ligaments and your tendons are going to attach, or where you're going to have an articulation with another bone. Okay. And then you're going to have tunnels or pores within the bone for blood and nerves. You also have sinuses, which is sort of like an air cavity. Well, I'm not going to quiz you and show you pictures of this on your test and say, what kind of marking is this? I'm going to show them to you so that you're familiar with them, but again, you're going to go over that a lot in lab. Trochanter, you can see this is sort of a rough projection sticking out. These ones are facet, condyle. They're going to be down towards articulations, okay, so wherever the bones are joining together. Tubercle. You're going to see the names sound very similar. It's going to take some practice to get used to these. That's why I said it's not just all the bones that you have to learn. You're going to learn all these markings. Okay, so that gets fun. The head of the bone is usually this rounded section that's surrounded or sort of discontinued from the long shaft from, it's called the neck. Okay, if we look, for example, in the skull, we have sinuses, so that's a chamber. We have canals. Foramen, this little tiny dot in the skull, that's called a foramen, and that's, again, where you're going to have a nerve or a blood vessel traveling through. Canals are usually bigger sections. Okay. Fissures, this tiny little crack back here. This is a process, your cheekbones. Okay. There's a bunch of these. Here's a ridge, a sulcus. This big part is called a crest. This flat area, a fossa, a spine, a line, ramus. Okay, so yeah, you got a lot to learn. Okay, but again, you don't have to sweat it out just yet, but you will have to, pretty sure that they're going to quiz you on that stuff. You're going to hear these terms in lab or in lecture, though, so you should know what they are. So if I say foramen, I assume that I mean that this is a pore or a hole in the bone that we're moving a different nerve through. And we get further in, we'll actually have names for specific structures in the bones. Okay, so just make sure you get familiar with them. I think there is a chart in your book you can look at. Okay, the structure. We're going to use a long bone as an example. We use different words for different areas of this bone. Okay, so the long part of the long bone, which is this part right here, is the diaphysis. Okay, so that's usually full of compact bone. It has a medullary marrow cavity in the center. Okay. The epiphysis, that's the edges of the bone. Okay, so down here and up here. And remember what think about epi is sort of above or around or surrounding, so the epiphysis is on either end. Metaphysis, this is the middle in between these two sections. Okay, it's kind of a gray region, okay, wherever these two areas are meeting. When we look at bone formation, metaphysis will make more sense to you. Okay. And you can think of that M, meta, like middle. Okay, so those are easy ways to remember that one. Okay, types of bone. We either have dense bone or we have spongy bone. Okay, so dense bone is solid, relatively. Okay, it again will surround usually a medullary cavity with the marrow, and that's usually going to be in the diaphysis of bones. Okay, and the reason for that is this is usually going to be bearing a lot of weight, okay, depending on that, or acting as a lever in some sort. Okay. Other words for spongy bone is going to be cancellous or trabecular. Okay, so there's another one of those things where they're going to throw 3 different words at you that mean all the same thing. Okay, and we're going to have pictures of these you'll see, but you'll usually see spongy bones at the ends of the epiphysis. Okay. A lot of times with the spongy bone, you're going to see it's a lattice, okay, or struts or trabeculae, and then on the outside is some compact bone. So again, you're seeing those terms, cortex on the outside, medullary in the center. Okay, and you can have usually some red marrow up in here. Okay, here's what compact bone looks like. This is the bone you're probably more familiar with seeing. Okay, we've looked at this. These are called osteons, these circles. Okay, you're going to see the central canal, and you still have those tiny little lacuna with the osteocytes in there. This is your spongy bone. This is a section if we're looking at the skull. This is called dipole, okay, which means double-sided, but there's cortex or a compact bone on either side, and this is what trabecular or spongy bone looks like on the inside. So lots of space. That means that's a lot lighter also. Okay. Here would be one of your clicker questions. So functions, this is an easy one. I won't ask you that. Well, I might ask you some easy ones on your test, but probably. Okay. A little bit about the tissue in your bones. You have supportive connective tissue that's really important for the structure. So we have dense connective tissue, we have cartilage, and of course the bone. The periosteum, okay, that's dense connective tissue, if you remember that from chapter 4. That covers the surface of all of our bones, except right at the joints. So I drew a little bone up here. It's going to be not a very good bone. Okay. Right here, okay, you're not going to have it, but everywhere else you would have this periosteum lining over it. Okay. And remember, it's a double layer. So it has an outer fibrous that's really tough, and then an intercellular layer. And those cells can differentiate and grow and do different things. The matrix in bone is very solid, right? If we look at the matrix in, say, blood, it's very fluid. But this is your protein fiber. The main one's going to be collagen, okay? And our ground substance, calcium salts. Okay, so what are the minerals? Most of your bone is calcium phosphate. You don't have to memorize these scientific notation, okay, unless you really want to be a superstar, but I'm not going to ask you that. But as long as you know calcium phosphate, that's most of your bone. It's going to combine with another salt. Just to remind you, what is a salt? When we say a calcium salt, remember that means two ions that form an ionic bond. Okay, that's a salt. It's an ionic compound, like sodium chloride. Sodium's positive, fluoride's negative. So calcium's positive, phosphate's negative. These are salts, and they form crystals, which means they're in this lattice sort of structure. Okay, so it's going to react with calcium hydroxide. And when those form together, they form a very strong crystal called hydroxyapatite. Okay, so that's your bone. And as these crystals are forming, they can incorporate other calcium salts. Okay, so we get some calcium carbonate, we can get magnesium, sodium, fluoride. Okay, so, but the main mineral that you have is calcium phosphate. Okay. The other part, the 1/3 of your matrix proteins, again, is mostly collagen. Okay, so you have calcium phosphate and collagen. Roughly about 2% of that is going to be living cells. So that's probably why you think of your bone as sort of this sort of static structure. It's not more cells than it is matrix, but when we get through, you're going to see how much those cells influence the shape and the structure of the bone. Your bone is so really interesting and complex because of these two components that it has. Calcium phosphate is extremely durable and hard, okay, but it's also brittle, so it would break pretty easily. If you're pushing down on it, it's able to withstand a lot of force. Like think of the weight of your body on your femur bones. Your femur is the longest bone in your body, but it has to support all of this weight. Okay, it's able to do that because it's a compression force. So that's okay. But what were to happen if somebody comes over and they were to hit you right in the side of the leg? Okay, it would snap pretty readily. But because you have collagen fibers and they're sort of spiraled throughout all the bones, that makes your bones flexible. I know it doesn't sound like it, but your bones actually do have some bend to them. Okay? Again, if somebody hits you with that as hard as they can, it's still probably going to break your femur, but other kind of motions that might hit your bones or different areas, you're going to be able to withstand forces in different directions. So that helps a lot. Okay, so this is just as strong as reinforced concrete. And that's why I say Mother Nature made it first. Probably better. Okay, so we know the matrix now. Okay, it's calcium phosphate with collagen. Now we're going to talk about the cells that are in there. Okay, there's 4 basic cells we're going to learn. Okay, and again, they only make up about 2% of the entire bone. Okay, we're going to see that they're in these little pockets called the lacuna, like we've mentioned that. The main cell that you see is the osteocyte. Okay, so that's the most abundant. This is a mature cell. Okay, that means it started off as a different cell, and then it decided what it wanted to be when it grew up. It differentiated into an osteocyte. Okay, I'm going to be a bone cell when I grow up. Okay, they sit in those little pockets in those lacuna, and they fill up the space. Okay, and there's space around them for diffusion of materials, but we also have those little channels all throughout compact bone called the caniculi. Okay, so that's this big word here. You're going to see the osteocytes will actually extend their plasma membranes out into those caniculi and attach to other cells. They can form gap junctions together and actually exchange materials pretty readily. So that's pretty cool. Okay. The osteoblast. Okay, this is an immature bone cell. So an osteoblast, we call these the builders. So think B and B. The blasts build things up. Okay, so these ones can secrete organic matrix and sort of build the bone. So this is more detail about your osteocytes. These ones, again, they're sitting in those little pockets. They don't divide. Okay, so once you're an osteocyte, you don't divide. What do? They do maintain the protein and mineral content of the matrix, so they can break it down and build it and change things around a little bit. Okay, so they have a function. They're in there like the little dozers from Fraggle Rock. Okay, building and remodeling. Okay, and they repair damaged bones. You might damage or fracture a bone and not have any idea. How many of you guys have ever had stress fractures in here? Okay, did you know at first that you had them? You guys? I had a friend who walked around with them for like a whole semester, had no idea that she had all these stress. So sometimes you don't even know, and your bones are not happy with you. But your body will start repairing that before you actually have a full break. Okay. Now what can happen, this is why osteocytes are cool. Even though they're differentiated in their mature cell, if for some reason that lacuna, that pocket breaks down, which happens a lot, right? You're dissolving bone, you're rebuilding it, it can actually become less specialized. It's like going back in time, and it can become a different cell type and actually go back to an osteoblast. Okay. This is showing you, we call this unit, okay, an osteon, one of these big circles. Okay, and these little circles around it, the bone's sort of building like this. Now those are called circumferential lamellae. Okay, so we're going to go over all this, but just so you see, the little tiny black smudges that you're seeing, those are the lacuna with the osteocytes in there. Okay, and there's our central canal. Okay, so the osteoblasts, these immature bone cells. These ones are responsible for what is called osteogenesis. So if you genesis is like generating something. It means making bone. Okay. So what they start with is this organic bone matrix. It's not solidified yet. Okay, so a lot of proteins, and they have calcium salts, but they're not crystallized just yet. We call that, when it's just sort of being put down, it's just called an organic matrix. It's called osteoid. Okay, so that's what that is. It's not hard yet. It's not calcified. Okay. What these cells will begin to do is then elevate even more calcium phosphate, okay, more and more until it becomes past the solubility limit. So it's no longer soluble in solution. It's now going to crystallize. And that's when you start having this deposition of these calcium salts. Okay, so that's the solidifying. So it converts. It's going to build the osteoid first and then convert it into bone. So that's how it's going to build. And you can sort of see this. Here's your osteoblast, here's your osteoid, here's matrix. Okay. And as it's building, okay, this osteoid, and it's becoming crystallized into bone around it, now it's surrounded itself. That's when it starts to differentiate into an osteocyte and becomes mature, once it's built itself into its little lacuna. Okay. The third cell I'm going to introduce you to is the osteoprogenitor cell. So progenitor cells, that should trigger you. You should think about that. That means progeny. So these are stem cells. Okay, so these are the ones that first start off. You're going to have these in different areas of the bone for, again, if you have a fracture or a break, you're going to regenerate your bone. These ones are the first cells. They actually differentiate into an osteoblast, Osteoblast starts building the bone, and then it matures into an osteocyte. Okay, so progenitor cell, blast cell, osteocyte. The last cell is the osteoclast. Okay, so this is this little guy down here. These ones break down bone. Okay, so they're actually going to break it down. And I put in there crack for C, like clast and crack, like break it down. Okay, so let's talk about the osteoprogenitor cells. These are mesenchymal cells, so migratory cells. Okay, they're located in what's called the endosteum. Okay, so the periosteum, remember what that is? That's the layer outside of the bone. Okay, it's that fibrous connective tissue. So that inner layer is called the endosteum. Okay, and this is important. It's going to line on the inside of the medullary cavity, and in some areas of spongy bone we're going to see it, and it's really important in assisting in fracture repair. We'll get back to the endosteum. Okay, osteoclast. These are big, crazy cells. Okay, check them out. This is what they look like. They look like little monsters or critters. Okay, so that's exactly what they are. They're not like regular bone cells. So you have all the nice little happy bone cells, the osteocytes, the blast, progenitor cells. Then these guys come in. They're from a different cell lineage. Okay, so they come from a whole different family. They're actually derived from the same cell types as macrophages. What does a macrophage do? It eats. That's all it does. That's what these things do. Okay, that's why they look like big critters. Okay, they're big and they've got a ton of nuclei in there. They're multinucleate, and they break down bone. Okay, and that sounds like it could be a bad thing, but it's the constant cycle of your body, right? You build it up, you break it down. You build it up, you're going to break it down. Okay, why would they do this? This process of breaking it down, we call this osteolysis. Lysis means to break apart, breaking apart bone. Okay, so the reason for that is you have to have a certain concentration of calcium and these different salts in your blood and in your interstitial fluid. So what's going to happen if that level starts dropping? Okay, you're going to need, what's the first place you're going to do? Hey, we have a whole skeleton of this stuff. You're going to start breaking it down. So if you're not getting this in your diet, okay, your body is going to take it from your bones to make sure that you keep those body levels where they need to be. Which brings us this. Homeostasis. You've really got to balance out the building of your bone to the breakdown. Okay, so we can think of the building like the osteoblast. Even though the osteocytes can maintain and break it down and build it around, we're thinking of the main builders as the blast and the main breaker downers, the osteoclast. Okay? If you start breaking down more bone than you're building, your bones are going to become much weaker. That makes a lot of sense, right? Okay. So how do you keep your bones dense? How do you keep them strong? What causes them to be built back up? You've got to stress them. Okay, so you need to exercise. So if you're lifting weights and moving around, just walking from your car to here, you stress and put weight onto your bones so that they're being used. Okay, but what about your upper body? So it's really important that you actually use weights and different things to put stress on there. So you're not only growing your muscles bigger, your bones stay dense and strong. Like this guy. Okay, so now we're going to get into the detail of, we're going to start with compact bone. Again, the functional unit is called an osteon. Okay, this is based off the Haversian system, which Dr. Haversian came up with. This whole big circle that I'm outlining, that is one osteon. Okay, so it's like the big circle. Okay. The osteocytes are arranged, and we say concentric lamellae. So lamellae are the layers coming out. You can think of this like a ring of a tree. So you can actually see a layer here, and then a layer there, and a layer there. Okay, so these layers, those are lamellae, or lamella. In the center, we have the central canal. That's where your main blood vessels are. Okay, so it's going to be diffusing oxygen and nutrients, vitamins to the bone cells, and removing waste and carbon dioxide. Okay, these run parallel to the bone. Okay. We also have other vessels. Your bones have tons of blood vessels in them. So when you get a break, it's pretty bloody gore. Maybe I'll find some cool pictures. You can get them now on extreme sport websites where the bones are sticking out, like shooting blood. It's great. Okay. Perforating canals, these are the ones that actually come in perpendicular. Okay, so they're going to come in this way to your bone like this. And they're sometimes called the canals of Wolfram. I'm going to name something after everybody. Okay. All these little tiny lines that you see coming out here, those again are caniculi. Okay, just keep using these words so they become familiar. The dark little smudges, the lacuna. Who lives in there? Osteocytes, yeah. Okay. Here's another cool picture of this. See the little pores, lacuna, the big central canal. Okay. Mature bone cells found in lacuna are called... Wow, you guys are brilliant. Okay. We have other types of lamellae as well. Okay, so we have what's called interstitial lamella. These are the ones filling the spaces in between those osteons. Where do they come from? Those are actually old osteons that have been broken down, and new ones are constantly being built. So if we look in here, this section, these are old osteons. So that's called interstitial, in between lamellae. Okay? So when we say your bone is constantly being broken down and rebuilt, we mean it. Okay? You rebuild about 1/5 of your skeleton every year. Different areas get built up more than others, but okay, so that means you might have a whole new skeleton compared to 5 years ago. The circumferential lamellae, these are the ones on the outer or inner bone surface. They're the ones covered by the periosteum. So this would be these ones out here, okay, or in here. So outer side. So these ones are called circumferential, these are interstitial, and these ones concentric. Okay, this again sort of shows you why this works so well in your bones. When you look at the long bones of your body that are really supporting a lot of your body weight, it's because they can have a force applied in a certain way that they're able to withstand a lot of that compression, okay, and they're not going to bend as long as you've been drinking your vitamin D, taking your calcium. Okay, and again, here's what those collagen spirals and the fibers look like going around the bone. Okay, so again, your bones are they're strong, they're slightly flexible, but if you're in a car accident or have some sort of strong force applied to perpendicular to the axis, okay, it can certainly break. So that's all compact bone. Now we're going to look at the structure of our spongy bone. These ones don't have those osteons, those circles. Okay, they have these little struts and those plates that we saw in that picture of the skull. These are called trabecula. Okay. These don't have any blood vessels. Okay, and they do have nutrients that diffuse along low caniculi, much lighter than compact bone because it has a lot of airspace in there. Okay. These ones are going to be in areas where you withstand stresses from many different directions. So if we look at your femur and your pelvis, the way that they're sitting, I should have brought my little skeleton. Maybe I'll bring him tomorrow. I have a little model. But the way that your pelvis sits, there's two tops to your femur, and it puts compression pushing down on one part of your femur and pulls up on the back side of it. Okay, so because of the way that is situated, at the top half, at the epiphysis of your femur, okay, the weight is not completely pushed down on it. So it can be a little bit lighter there. It's not withstanding everything. Most of the weight is directed down into the longer portion of the femur where the compact bone is. It's actually a very cool design. If anything, when you come out of here, even if you hate this class or you hate me or you hate everything about school, you're going to realize that way that your body is designed and how it works is really a miracle. It's actually pretty cool. I get excited. Okay, your red bone marrow. So this fills the spaces between the trabeculi and the spongy bone. Blood vessels for red blood cell formation. Okay, and supplies a lot of nutrients to those osteocytes and will remove all the waste. Okay, if there's yellow marrow, that's where the fat storage is going to be. This is what it looks like. Okay, you can actually see it sort of looking down. Any questions on any of this stuff? I would say the best thing to do, get your definitions down and really know them. So if you get really familiar with your definitions, I mean, if you've heard periosteum about 10 times now, if you weren't sure what that was, like, what is she talking about? That's why I try to keep reminding you. But if you already knew what that is, then you're already getting the second part of whatever I'm saying. You're not already back there going, wait, what does that mean? Okay, so definitions are really key. Okay, so again, this is your lining, your connective tissue that lines the outer portion of the bone. Okay, except again, those joint cavities. Okay, it's going to isolate your bone from the surrounding tissues. Okay, you actually have vessels and nerves that are going to go in underneath this and provide and be right next to the bone. Okay, and also very important in bone growth and repair, so that intercellular layer is important for that. Okay. And your joints around it, the periosteum becomes continuous. That means it's woven into tendons and ligaments. So you have this is why I love my colored chalk. So you have this layer out here, right? Lining all the bones, and it's going to come around this way. Okay, this is going to be cartilage down here, but this is actually going to weave into whatever bone or tendon or ligament down here. Okay, so these capsules on the outside, these fibrous capsules, actually weave in and link together. Okay, so that's extremely strong. Okay, which is why, you know, again, you're going to sometimes break a bone before you might tear a ligament. Okay, so we have fibers in the periosteum. Those are called perforating fibers, if you see that. Okay, this is the periosteum. This is on the outer edge of the bone. And they've got some tweezers, and they're pulling it back. So they're showing you right here. Okay, so on the outer layer, very fibrous and tough. And then the inner layer, this is the cellular layer that you're looking at here, okay, which has the ability to regenerate and grow and make some new bone. The endosteum. This is actually derived, it comes out of the periosteum, but it lines inside in that medullary cavity, so it's going to be in here. We had a little cavity right in here. It would be lining that. So inside the endosteum, it's sort of this incomplete cellular layer, and you have a lot of osteoblasts that are in there, osteoprogenitor cells. Okay, so you can regenerate new cells. You have osteoclasts that hang out in there. Okay, these ones are very active in bone growth. Okay, so we're looking right in here to the inside. Okay, you're going to sort of see here's the endosteum. Here's a progenitor cell. Here's a big old monster osteoclast. You know what they look like? The little ghost from Pac-Man. I'll help you. Okay, now the exciting stuff, how your bones grow. Okay, so growing your bones, osteogenesis. Ossification is the process of replacing other tissues with bone. So what other tissues are we talking about? Usually cartilage into bone. We actually remodel it. Or we can even use connective tissue and remodel that into bone. So that's called ossification. That's how we make our bones. Okay, when you started off as itty little bitty fetus, you were all cartilage, and it all became calcified into bone. Calcification, make sure you don't mix these two definitions up. Calcification is not actually making your bones. That's the process of depositing calcium salts. Okay, so that happens when we're doing ossification. However, it can occur in other tissues as well when we're not making bones, which is not necessarily a good thing. Okay. Your bones are growing up until you're 25 years old. So you might think of you're growing, you hit puberty, you grow even more. And then you stop, right? And you think that's it. But you didn't stop growing at 18 or 19. Parts in your wrist and your ankles, your knees, those parts are still growing. Okay, so hopefully you're taking good care of yourself. Take your Flintstone 5 minutes. Okay. This is the important stuff, ossification. So how do we change this tissue into bone? How are we going to remodel it? There's two types. Endochondrial and intramembranous. Okay, so I want you to use your brains because we're learning how to think in here. Endochondrial. Endo means within. What does chondro mean? Cartilage. Where do you think this means? Like automatically you should think about this. This will help you. You'll be like, oh, okay, let me look at the word. This is going to be ossification that comes from within cartilage. So this is easy stuff. Usually it's hyaline cartilage. So that's what your little skeleton was before you were a skeleton. Okay. Intramembranous ossification, this comes from usually connective tissue. Usually mesenchymal cells or fibroblasts come in and connective tissue, you're going to transform that. Okay? We call this dermal ossification because remember, the dermis is connective tissue underneath the epidermis, and that's where this begins. So some examples of bones that are specific for this formation would be your lower jaw, your mandible, your clavicle, your collarbone, some of the bones in your skull. Okay, so these are ones were made from intramembranous ossification. Most of the other bones come from endochondral. Here's the fun stuff. Yeah, you gotta learn the steps. So on the test, what I normally would do, and then there might be one on your practice test to show you, I'll give you the steps and you have to put them in order. So for this one, the first thing that's going to happen, so you have cartilage. We'll say you start off with your hyaline cartilage. It starts growing, so those cells are getting bigger. What's happening is the cells in there, these are chondrocytes, so cartilage cells. They are actually getting bigger and bigger. They're growing larger. So when they do that, they're expanding out the lacuna. Okay, when that happens, it's actually breaking down the matrix around it. So it's going to be like that gelatinous matrix of cartilage, but starts breaking that down. And this is happening in the center, okay, of the soon-to-be new bone. Okay, it'll start to break it into struts. Okay, so it's going to be almost like that trabecula that you've seen in spongy bone. Okay, and it's somewhat calcified. Okay, when that happens, it's actually walling itself off. It can no longer get any nutrients. Okay, so in a sense, it commits cell death. Okay, so it locks itself out. It doesn't get any nutrients, and the chondrocytes actually die. Okay, so it's now calcified cartilage without any cells in there. It's not considered bone yet. In the second step, we have some blood vessels that are going to come in. They're growing into, now this is, be careful on this, the perichondrium. Okay, so this is the layer that surrounds cartilage. What was it in bone? Periosteum. So at this point, it's still the perichondrium because this is still cartilage. Okay, so those vessels start to infiltrate that. Okay, the inner layer of the perichondrium, still the perichondrium, is going to start differentiating into osteoblasts. Okay, so those are our bone builders. So they start producing this thin layer of bone. The blood vessels are going to grow further into the central region of our cavity. Okay, fibroblasts are going to come in. Okay, so we have osteoblasts, and now we have fibroblasts coming in, and they're migrating and they're becoming more osteoblasts. So we're getting this big infiltration of osteoblasts. Okay, those ones now are starting to secrete a bunch of spongy bone. This center part, we're in the diaphysis. If we'll say we're in a long bone. This is called the primary ossification center. So that's the center part. Remember, that one comes first. Okay, and this is going to start growing around and up and down. Step 4, and the bone's being remodeled as this is happening. So it's building and it's breaking down, it's reshaping. Okay, so now osteoclasts are going to come in. They're the ones that are going to be breaking down and reshaping things. They go into the very center and they start breaking down that spongy bone. Okay, what they're doing is forming the medullary cavity. So we're going to put bone marrow in there. So for now, it needs space. When it does that, it's going to form a cavity and in come all the vessels. Okay, and the bone keeps growing and growing. In step 5, now we're going to move out. So that was all in the center of our bone. Now we're going to move out to the end, the epiphysis. Okay, so these ones are going to begin calcifying. You're going to have vessels growing into them, okay, as you're seeing up here. Okay, same thing, we're going to have blood supply, and then we got osteoblasts coming in. These are called the secondary ossification centers. So first starts here, and then secondary on the outside. It starts building all this bone. On the outside, this was cartilage, remember. This is now called articular cartilage. It's going to stay cartilage all the way around here. Okay. Articular, what does that signal to you? Joints. This is where it's going to meet to a joint. So you have cartilage on the outer side of this. Okay. On the inside, you have spongy bone. This right here is called the epiphyseal cartilage. Okay, so it's going to be reduced, but we're going to see that this is now the division. When I was telling you that that's going to make more sense between the epiphysis and the metaphysis, okay, this is the division between that. Okay, so this is right here, metaphysis. This would be the diaphysis. So right in this center section, okay, that's where we're going to see. It's this, what we call the epithelial cartilage, separates the two out. What we find right here, as the bones are growing, what's happening, we have these cells are sort of racing. At this end, we have osteoblasts. They're eating up that cartilage and they're remodeling and they're making bone. At this layer, up here, we have our chondrocytes, our cartilage is still growing and going this way. So it's like this cell is growing this way, and if I had, do you want to stand up for a minute? She's like, sure.
Are you going to chase me?
No, I'll let you chase me. You can be the osteoblast. So if she's the osteoblast and I'm the cartilage, and we're going to walk at the same rate at first. This is your bones growing, and it would be happening in the other direction. If we're the same distance apart, she can never catch me if we're growing and going at the same way. Okay, let's stop. And what happens, though, as you get through puberty, I'm going to slow down. Your cartilage stops growing, but she keeps building bone, so you can keep moving up. So she's now dissolving all that cartilage, and that's what's going to happen when your bones stop growing. Okay, we're going to meet. Thank you, osteoblast. So that's what you're going to see right here is going to happen. This is going to sort of grow up, and eventually you're going to get what's called the epithelial lines. Let's see if that's coming up. Yeah, there they are. Okay. So these bones, here's your blast, dissolving, dissolving. So for a while your bones are growing in either direction, the blasts and the chondrocytes are growing at the same rate. It's just when that cartilage slows down that the osteoblasts are going to catch up, and they're going to break all this down and make it bone. And then you're just left with a line, okay, which is kind of hard to see on this slide, but in your book it looks pretty good. Okay, so those are called epithelial lines. So next time you get your x-ray done, if this ever happens in your hands or feet or something, or in bones, you can check it out and be like, hold on, I want to see my lines. Apositional growth. This is occurring, this is part of endochondral ossification. Anytime you hear apositional growth, it means it's sort of growing out like this. Okay, so this is happening, it's increasing the diameter. If we were to go back here, it would be right here, where you're going to start to see this outer layer, okay, where it's producing the thin layer of bone. This is where in step 2, apositional growth. So endochondral ossification is talking about it going this way. Apositional is going to be the diameter getting bigger. Does that make sense? All right, so yeah. Great. This is the type, so when you have apositional growth, those are the ones on the very outside. They're going to be the circumventral lamellae. So that's within the cartilage. Now let's look at the other type, the intramembranous ossification. This one's a little bit less detailed. I'm like, less detailed? What's that slide? In this case, instead of having our osteoblasts, we're going to start off with mesenchymal cells. Okay, so these ones are going to come in, and they're the ones that start secreting matrix. And remember what mesenchymal cells are. These are like, they're not stem cells, but they're almost like a more differentiated, more grown-up stem cell. They can still differentiate into a lot of cell types. And they can migrate and do different things and go in different areas. Okay, so these ones come in first, and we're in usually dermis. So we're in the dermis, and this gets the signal to start growing in there and start secreting organic components of the matrix. You start to get the osteoid, okay, and it becomes mineralized and crystallized. And some of those cells now become osteoblasts. Okay, so we're back to our builders. Okay, and it's going to grow out from the center of this area. It's called the ossification center. There's only one in this case. And wherever it starts growing out of, you're going to have lots of locations. The pink part that you're seeing, that's the actual bone. Out here would be the connective tissue. These are called spicules. Okay, so these spicules are going to grow out in different directions. Okay, and eventually they're going to grow together. And when they grow together, they trap osteoblasts within them. That's when they grow up and become an osteocyte. And it looks like this when they all fuse. Okay, so we're going to trap some of them in there. Okay, we're going to trap blood vessels in there. Okay, these ones are going to usually make spongy bone initially. Okay, so you're going to get all this layers in there. It can be remodeled after you get the struts and the trabecula in there. It can start actually forming osteons and compact bone. Around it, as the growth slows down, the periosteum is going to form. Okay, and again, that's an outer layer of connective tissue. Okay, and some of the osteoblasts then become the intercellular layer of the periosteum. Okay, see, I told you that one wasn't so bad. So we've talked about how dynamic, when I say dynamic or static, I mean dynamic means changing, static means no change. Okay, so when we say that they're really dynamic, we mean they're constantly being broken down and rebuilt. Even though the structure looks the same, you're not going to come in one day with like a bone that has a right angle, right? Okay, so the structure is going to be the same, but the same cells that were there, a year ago aren't the ones that are there now. Okay. In order for that to happen, you need a lot of energy. You need a lot of oxygen. You need a lot of nutrients. That's got to come from the blood. So you're going to have a main nutrient artery and vein in every bone. Okay, in your big bones, like the femur, you're going to have 3 or 4 of these coming in. Okay. It supplies the blood to the diaphysis, so the long shaft of our bone. You're also going to have metaphyseal vessels, and these ones will come into the aphyseal cartilage, where bone growth is occurring, which again is very important for those cells to be able to supply with enough fuel. Let's look at those. Here's the main nutrient artery and vein coming in, and see what it says right here? It comes in through a nutrient foramen. Okay, so that's a little hole in the bone that it's coming into. Okay, it's going to grow up this way. Here's the metaphyseal, okay, and those will grow up into the aphyseal, supply up there. The other one we have is the periosteal vessels. Okay, and these ones are on the outside, the superficial. So remember, superficial means outer layers. So that's around the outside of those. Okay. What you're going to find, and here's a close-up of that. Okay, so even right here, you can see there's vessels. All these vessels grow in, and then they sort of interweave and all connect together. So you have one big, large supply. Okay. Besides having all those vessels in there, you have lymphatic vessels, okay, and then also you have a ton of nerves, lots of nerves. Okay, so when you break a bone, extremely painful. Anybody break a bone in here before? Not that many. How many have never broken a bone? Okay, ow. You don't know what you're missing. You get to wear a cool cast. It's awesome. Yeah, and they have cool casts these days. Glow in the dark. Here's another option of this. It's just a bigger picture. Okay, so bone remodeling. So it's constantly being changed, built up and broken down. Replacing your mineral reserves. So we need our osteocytes, blasts, and our clasts. Okay. The turnover rate varies in different sections. In the long part of your femur, for instance, there's not a ton of turnover. That's a really strong structure, and you need it. But on other areas where there's less weight, you might get more remodeling occurring faster. You're still going to have remodeling, it just might not be as fast. Okay. If you're depositing more minerals than you're removing, your bones are going to get dense and strong. Okay, so that's a good thing. You want to have big, strong bones. If you're removing that, okay, for whatever reason, you're not using your bones, okay, or you're not supplying with enough minerals, so it's being broken down, your bones get weak. Okay. Some other things that can happen that are detrimental to our health would be when we take in a heavy metal ion. So lead, uranium, plutonium. You guys know, I told you, be careful when you play with plutonium. When you have these heavy metals, they look just like calcium. Okay, so they're very similar structures to calcium. The body doesn't know. An osteoblast isn't going in there saying, this is plutonium. It's like, hey, you look right, you have the right charge, I'm going to make you into a salt and mineralize you. So these get stored in your bones, which is not a good thing because that's okay if they're going to be stuck in there forever. But what happens, it's going to be remodeled. Your bone again, broken down, you're doing different things. It's released into your bloodstream. Now you've got plutonium running around in there. That is bad. Okay, so a lot of times what we see, and I'm going to use The Biggest Loser as an example, but those people that maybe have done nothing for a long time and now they're being extremely active, they have to be very, very careful because they have these large lipid reserves, they have these bone reserves, and now it's being broken down. They're inducing all these changes in their bodies. So when they're on that show, you can guarantee that they're having them drink a ton of water to flush them out, because if you don't flush these things out of your body, you can get very sick, and who knows what you're releasing in there. There's a story of this tonic that they had. It was very popular. This is when the Curies discovered radioactivity. Okay, and everybody thought it was super cool. They had radium, and they would make the glow-in-the-dark watches, and the women would paint it on, and they would use the brush. They would use their tongues to sharpen the brush. Okay, so they would have a lot of severe bone deformities, and they would get bone cancer from that. And there was a famous golfer. His name is escaping me right now, but he was like a very cool guy, I guess the Tiger Woods back then. He would drink this tonic made out of radioactivity twice a day because it was superpowers and made him have great sex drive, and he was an animal, and whatever it was. Yeah, he didn't do so well. So by the time he passed away, they had removed most of his jaw, parts of his bones. He had severe debilitating bone disease, so from bone cancer. So kind of tipped him off. Hey, maybe this tonic radioactivity stuff is bad. It's kind of scary when you think about that. Okay. So here's one for you. If osteoblasts were to differentiate in mesenchymal or fibrous connective tissue, what is that called? Intramembranous. And hopefully if you did pick that one, you would have picked this one. Exercise. Exercise has a ton of effect on your bone. So when we say stressing out your bone, we don't mean your bones are in there going, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. Okay. No, that means putting force or weight on them, which is a good thing. They like it. So we think is happening, this is one theory which is pretty cool. When you put weight or stress onto a bone, the mineral crystals within the bone actually start generating an electrical field. Okay, so again, these are all ions, these are crystals, so positive and negative charges on there. When they set out this, we'll call it a force field because that's fun, this electrical field, these osteoblasts are attracted to that, and they come in and they start building bone. So it's sort of like the signal saying, hey, we're stressing out here, we need more weight over here, we need you to build bone. So, and they're actually able to use this now with people that have had fractures or breaks. They can put these electrical impulses into their bone to get their own cells to come in and strengthen it, which is super cool. This is why if you guys are learning this stuff in here and you're like, this is boring, you could save somebody's life. Who knows what you're going to come up with? So you got to know the boring stuff to do all the cool stuff. All right, so you have a lot of mineral recycling, okay, which is, again, you're constantly rebuilding and making it stronger. Lifting heavy weights. I hope you guys all come on here and go to the gym today and bulk up. Be good for you. Okay, because that's going to, again, make your bones very dense and strong. Okay. If you don't use your bones, they degenerate very quickly. So they build up fast, but it's almost like they degenerate faster. So if you happen to break an arm or a leg and you're not using it, if you're an astronaut, I know a lot of you are like, man, I'm going to space next week. What am I going to do? If you become paralyzed or bedridden for some reason, you can really lose your bone very quickly. For those of you guys that broke your bone, did you guys have a lot of bone loss? You can feel it, right? When you take it out of the cast, it's like your muscles like, okay, your muscles weak, but yeah, your bones, your arm is like this scrawny. You have one arm that's like this, and the other one's like, okay. So, but you can build it back. But the point is, guys usually don't have as many problems with this because of two things. One, a lot of guys, they lift weights more. Women do more cardio. Okay, so they already have stronger bones. And then two, the different hormones that we have for guys, they actually, testosterone will not have an effect as much. You guys will have testosterone forever, right? Where women, estrogen starts breaking down as you get older and older, which can then have an effect on how your bone is built up. Okay, what about nutrition? Okay. So you need to eat calcium, we know that, and phosphates are very important. Okay, you also need small amounts of magnesium, fluoride, iron, and manganese. Calcitriol, this is a hormone. Okay, so it's made in your kidneys. And again, where did it come from? It came from vitamin D. Okay, so cholecalciferol, that's vitamin D. So that you need to synthesize this in your kidneys. Okay, so remember this comes from your kidneys, and it's made from vitamin D. calcitriol. And what this does is helps absorb, and it actually has an effect on the intestines and different areas, but it helps you absorb calcium and phosphorus from the digestive tract. So if you're eating a ton of calcium, but you don't have any vitamin D, so you have no calcitriol, you're not going to absorb that calcium. It's just going to go right through your system. So it's important that you have both. Vitamin C, very important for collagen. So if you had all this great matrix and this strong ground substance, but you have no collagen in there, that's not going to work. It's also important for your osteoblasts to differentiate. Vitamin A, important for osteoblast activity. K and B12 for bone proteins. Okay, and then these two hormones, calcitonin and parathyroid. Okay, these are very important in regulating calcium and phosphate levels in the blood. These are antagonistic. Okay, so they work in opposite directions. Okay, don't want you to mix up calcitriol with calcitonin. They do opposite things. Calcitriol works with parathyroid. Okay, so these two are on the same team. We'll sort of see that in a minute. So, your skeleton is this reserve of calcium. If you ever need it, you're going to build it up. Okay? Calcium is the most abundant mineral in your body. If you're ever on Jeopardy, you need to know that. If you're doing trivia night at the bar, you need to know that one. Okay? Why is it so important and why do we have so much of this? It's extremely important for your neurons and your muscle cells and your heart cells. Okay. This is what happens if you have too much calcium in a muscle or nerve cell. It becomes unresponsive. Okay. If you don't have enough calcium, your neurons fire and fire and fire and fire. Okay. You get convulsions, you get tetany, you can become paralyzed, and you die. Why? I haven't told you why. I just want to see if you can come up with something of why that would happen. You would have to know who's taken 1442. They're like, you should know it, 1442 people. You should have an idea because you learned how nerves work and muscles work. I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with the inside of the cell is what charge? Negative, right? And the outside is positive, and that's important to maintain that potential, right? That membrane potential. So there's something to do with that. Think along those lines. You're like,
Well, your muscles are going to stay, your muscles are either going to stay contracted or I won't be able to, one of those, right? They're either going to be contracted or won't be able to.
yeah, but why?
Your heart wouldn't be able to contract.
Yeah, we know the muscles either they're going to freeze up and fire, 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 or they're not going to work at all. But why?
Calcium causes the myosin and the actin to come together. And if you don't have enough ATP to release that, your muscles stay really active.
So that's one thing. What is it? It's not the acetylcholine.
Is it like, it does the calcium tell the acetylcholine esterase to like get rid of the acetylcholine so the muscle can alive?
Okay. There's parts of it. So there's a little bit there, but the main reason of what's happening, but you guys are thinking, so that's good. You have all these negative charges. There's a lot of calcium that sits on the outside of your cells, okay, that's attracted to those forces, and it generates this positive. Okay, so if you have too much calcium, you have so many positive charges out here, okay, that you never are able to open the sodium channels. Okay, they're not able to ever respond. Okay, because that's what happens, right? The calcium changes up the membrane potential and initiates, so the sodium can come rushing in and send, whether it's contraction of the muscle or begin the neuron to signal. If you have so much calcium, you have such a large differential, you can never overcome it to actually send the signal in the first place. So the cells don't do anything. That's not as dangerous. I mean, that's dangerous, but this is way worse. Okay, when your calcium starts getting really low, what happens is you start losing this completely. Okay? And it's very easy for sodium starts leaking in because there's no longer this huge charge. It opens up some of the sodium. Sodium comes rushing in there. Okay, now you've got it super positive on the inside. When that happens, it starts firing. Okay, so that's whenever you have it fire over and over and over. You start convulsing, then tetany sets in, then paralysis. So that can happen pretty quick. So cool stuff. Calcium's important. Okay, so the main regulation of calcium homeostasis, okay, in the blood is going to be these two, tonin and parathyroid. Okay, so I put in here antagonistic. Okay, so in the bloodstream, you have to regulate this level of calcium for your muscles and your neurons. So these two hormones work together to do this. Okay, so they control the storage, the absorption, and the excretion rates. Calcitonin is produced in the thyroid. Okay, parathyroid hormone comes from the parathyroid glands, which are inside of the thyroid gland. 3 areas that they work off of to maintain the balance: bones, because that's a storage site; digestive tract, which will absorb it or release it; okay, and then kidneys for excreting it. Okay, so these is what they're going to work on. Parathyroid hormone is sometimes called PTH. Okay, so again, it's produced by your parathyroid glands. Okay. It increases calcium levels. And I added this so you guys make sure that you know what the reference point I'm talking about in the blood. Okay, so it increases calcium ions in the blood. So why would you release it if your calcium is too low? Okay, so when calcium levels drops, that would be the stimulus. The effect that you would want is we want to increase calcium levels. Okay, so how does it do it? What are the effects of this hormone? It stimulates osteoclasts. Okay, so it sends in the big monsters to come in and start eating the bones and breaking down calcium, which will be released into the bloodstream, okay, to raise it back up. They're also going to increase intestinal absorption. So you're eating food throughout your digestive tract. It's going to go right through, okay, but it's going to work, and I added this in here as well. It works with calcitriol. Okay, and the way I remember this when I was in school is calcitriol, you should try it. Try calcium, like have more of it. Increase it. Okay, I don't know, that worked for me. Okay. It also is going to decrease excretion at the kidneys. You don't want to lose it, you want to keep it. So, okay, we're not going to let it go out of the kidneys. We're going to absorb more in the intestines, and we're going to break down our bone. Okay, so that's when it's low. What if it's too high? That's when calcitonin works. So this is secreted by cells called C cells that are parafollicular cells, again, in the thyroid. These work to decrease calcium levels. That's what they do. So the stimulus would be it's too high. Okay? They prevent osteoclast activity. You don't want those cells breaking down bone and releasing more. You already have too much. So you're going to say, okay, don't break down any bone. Okay? And the other thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you're excreting more out of the kidneys. So we're going to get rid of calcium. Okay, so factors that increase blood calcium levels. When I ask you this on the test, make sure you're thinking of it from the perspective of what has to happen first for this to be released. So in order for PTH, or parathyroid hormone, to be released, or calcitriol to be activated, okay, we would need blood levels of calcium to be low. These are secreted to bring them back up. Okay, so again, we increase absorption in our intestines, we break down the bone, and we prevent it from being excreted. And that's going to bring it back up. This one, it's too high. How do we bring it back down? So we don't absorb it, we excrete it, okay, and we stop breaking down the bone. So here's about normal level. And that is in there, so you guys can think of it this way. This would be your stimulus. Okay, blood calcium drops. Which hormones out of the antagonistic ones, either calcitonin or PTH, which one is going to be secreted for your levels are low? That's PTH. Obviously, if they're high, calcitonin. That's a little calcitriol. Okay, what happens in this case? So you release PTH, it's out there. What happens now to osteoclast activity? Increases. Right. Okay, so sort of ask yourself the questions that way. If I give you a scenario, a patient comes in and has, low calcium, how does the body react to fix this? Okay, and this is about what normal level is. I'm not going to ask you that on the test, but if you're curious, it's about 8.5 to I think 10.2 or 10.5 or 11 mgs per deciliter. Yeah. Large numbers of calcium ions are now mobilized in body fluids, and it says what happened to the bones? They became weaker, because it means where did all these calcium ions come from? Probably from their bones, which means they broke down. Any questions on that one with the antagonistic hormones? So think of the main two hormones as the calcitonin and the PTH. Calcitriol works with PTH, but it sort of does its own thing. Okay. Fractures. So this is any kind of cracks or breaks in the bones. These are all the major types, okay, that are in here. Hot fractures are for your ankle. Minuid, a shattered bone, transverse, just like a transverse section right across. Spiral would be a twisting one. Displaced, displaced bone. Coles was from radius. Green stick, this is one side of the shaft is broken, the other side is bent. Epiphyseal fractures, this is where the bones undergoing calcification. And then compression, which is usually the vertebrae. Shows you some examples of these. And you should know these ones. You should know what they are. So if I ask you, where does a pot fracture occur? You should know it's in your ankle. Here's some pictures of these good ones. There's a spiral, displaced. Here's the green stick. So this one's bent out. Cut. Epiphyseal fracture. Oh, that's a nasty one. And there's compression. Okay, so let's look at what happens. This is probably my favorite picture in this textbook because I don't know why, I just think that's funny. It just looks funny to me. But so whenever you break a bone, like we said, you have so many vessels in there, there's a lot of bleeding. Okay, so the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a blood clot that starts forming. So the whole process of the blood clot cascade is going to happen very quickly. Is that going to be a positive or negative feedback? Do you guys remember blood clotting? Positive. That's the one that the body's okay, we started clotting, now we're going to clot even faster because, hey, you could die pretty quickly if you don't. Okay. Whenever we have this happening, when you have the blood occurring in there, that's called a fracture hematoma. So this big clot that's going to happen. Okay, and it's going to close off and wall off your vessels that are injured. Okay, and it's going to start building that fibrinogen, that fibrous network. Okay, and the bone cells in that area are going to die. So right around the break and then above it and below it, you're going to have a lot of necrotic mass, a lot of death and destruction occurring. Okay. But it's okay, because your body will survive. The cells in your peristeum and endosteum, the inner layer and the medullary cavity, they're going to start dividing very quickly and start growing into that area. One of the first things that forms is called the external callus. So just like you get a callus on your palm or on your foot, sort of like that, but it's on the outer part of this bone. It's a very tough structure. It's just to help stabilize these two edges of the bone and put them back together. In the medullary cavity, you're going to have an internal callus form, so one on the outside and one on the inside. So your osteoblasts are going to come in. They start replacing any kind of cartilage of your external callus with spongy bone. So you start with spongy bone. They're going to remove, so you're going to have all sorts of white blood cells are going to be in there. Your macrophages, you're going to have osteoclasts coming in, cleaning house and getting rid of all those little bone shards and fragments and dead cells. Okay? And it's going to continue to remodel that bone. So you're going to be building it up and breaking it down and remodeling it for anywhere from 4 months to a year, depending on how long it's going to be. But it might look something like this when it's somewhat healed, but you're still remodeling on the inside. Yeah.
What would you call a shin splint?
A shin splint is not on.
Fracture.
Is it a fracture? It's your muscle, right?
Muscle. Healing.
There you go. It's when your muscle pulls away from the bone. Sounds great.
It sucks.
Falling on outstretched hands and whoosh, what kind of fracture would that cause?
That is, I think they actually have one in here. They showed it to you. Oh yeah, right here, reaching out to cushion a fall. So that's usually it cools.
Compound fracture.
Compound.
Bone versus.
Okay, so that's all your fun, exciting breaks, and I'll look for some cool, gross pictures to gross you out tomorrow. Okay. Osteopenia. This is when your bones, this is a natural process that happens. Your bones are going to become thinner and weaker with age. This is just what happens as you get older. Inadequate ossification, so you're not making bone the way you used to. And it actually starts happening at age 30 to 40. The blast activity will start slowing down, and class activity still keeps going. So women lose a lot more bone mass than men. Okay, your epiphyses, your vertebrae, the jaws are the ones that are most affected frequently. So you can lose your teeth, your height, you start shrinking down. Your limbs are fragile. Like I don't know if you guys ever watch some of the cartoon shows that show like old people standing up and their hips break. That actually happens. But not just with osteopenia. This is just basic. Can you prevent this? Of course you can. If you're working out, I love this when I see like people in the gym that are like 80, like pumping iron. I'm like, go man, that's awesome. So you can prevent that. If you're constantly losing your bones, then they're not going to weaken. But the differences again between men and women, there's a lot of them. But one thing, guys were going to build more bone than women initially anyway, but again, when we say we have estrogen that's going to slow down when women hit menopause, and that has an effect on ossification. So they'll oftentimes, we have women that are going through menopause, they'll say, you have to have calcium and vitamin D and estrogen supplements to try to keep it up. But bigger thing would be obviously using your bones. Osteoporosis, this is an extreme form of that. It results from osteopenia. So this is when you have so much bone mass loss that it compromises the function. Okay, so this is when it becomes that's when you stand up and your bone cracks in half. This is a nice normal bone, and this would be one with osteoporosis. So there's a lot of commercials that just make it seem like you're automatically going to get it. I'm like watching these commercials on TV. It's like a death sentence for women. Like, you're going to get this. Okay. You won't. This is pretty severe. It's on. I mean, just use your muscles and your bones and you'll be fine. So, estrogens, your androgens, which are your testosterone, those help maintain your bone mass. So again, for women, this accelerates after menopause when estrogen levels drop off. You can also have some cancers, like we talked about the radioactive golf player. I'll look up his name for you. But some cancerous tissues will release what's called osteoclast activating factor. So it turns those babies on, and they just start eating like crazy. So it induces severe osteoporosis in different areas of the body. Okay. Some important things in this chapter. Your basics, like the functions of your skeletal system,